Have you ever concealed some sins in confession and you do not want to tell them? Then this video is for you. Poor soul, I can imagine your trouble. To you above all I say, courage. These disastrous hidings, especially when there is question of purity or honesty, often spring from a principle praiseworthy in itself. A person deeply imbued with the sentiment, the esteem of chastity or honesty, feels more keenly than another the faults that violate either of these virtues. Nevertheless, there is no question, they must be told like the rest. We must shun the poison of sacrilege more than any other, seeing that sacrilege is, in its nature, more directly opposed to the sanctity of God. That will cost you much. Yes, certainly. But also, what frightful chastisements it will save you. What a magnificent recompense that moment of humiliation will merit for you. How the priest will esteem your soul preserved by him from hell. Saint Antoninus, Bishop of Florence, relates that in a town in the north of Italy, a young man who had been piously brought up, falling one day into a shameful sin, was so humiliated by it that he dared not confess it. At first, he resolved to declare it, but the words died on his lips and he said nothing. He received absolution unworthily and communicated unworthily. Tormented by remorse, he returned soon again to confession. The false shame held him this time faster than the first, and he lived that way, confessing and communicating, vainly asking pardon from God, more and more ashamed of himself, grieved at his sacrileges, heaped one upon another, and never having courage to confess them. He tried to make amends for his confession by hard penance, fasting, and good works, which gained him the reputation of a saint. At last, holding out no longer, he resolved to enter a monastery in order to get rid, once and for all, of the burden which was crushing him and expiate his sins by doing rigorous penance for the rest of his life. Unfortunately for him, his reputation for sanctity caused him to be received into the monastery with a kind of veneration, as if his entrance into religion was a blessing and a grace for all his new brethren. Self-love, alas, took possession of him once more, and he promised to make a good confession later on, when the first impressions had subsided. Yes, a general confession in which he would tell all, absolutely all. He put it off thus from week to week, from month to month, being in appearance a very holy penitent, in reality an abomination before God. He longed for some accident, some sickness, which would force him with violence from his fearful state. A dangerous sickness came at last, and he confessed his sins, but with so much holding back, so vaguely, so obscurely, that the priest could not understand, nor the penitent be freed from his remorse. He resolved to repeat his confession and make it better, but delirium prevented him, and he died a few days later without having recovered the use of his reason. The good religious, who had been much edified by his penance, held him for a saint. Some days later, as they were preparing to celebrate his funeral obsequies, he appeared to a brother who was praying in the choir. His aspect was terrible, and he was enveloped in flames. He told the affrighted brother the cause of his then irreparable misfortune, and concluded by saying, "Pray not for me, I am damned." And the terrible vision vanished. Do you wish the same to happen to you? Imitate then the courageous humility of Saint Angela of Foligno, who also in her youth had the misfortune to hide some sins in confession. The love of her reputation closed her mouth for years. When one night, not being able any longer to bear with herself, she arose, fell on her knees, and bursting into tears, invoked with fervor the aid of Saint Francis of Assisi, in whom she had always the greatest confidence. The saint appeared and said with sweet compassion, "Poor child, if thou hadst called me sooner, long ago I would have helped thee. Tomorrow, at the break of the day, go out of the house, and the first priest whom thou meetest is the one I have sent thee for a confessor to save thee." Next morning, Angela met at the door a good Capuchin father who was going to the church to celebrate Holy Mass. She followed him. After Mass, she went to confession with great repentance and extraordinary joy. She soon made rapid progress in sanctity. She entered the third order of Saint Francis, where she died many years ago in extreme old age, enriched with the gift of miracles and having attained to sublime sanctity. Oh, how good God is! Poor sick heart, exhausted by remorse, for a long time perhaps, bowed under the yoke of the demon, arise at length and do as did Saint Angela. Go without reflecting, without bargaining longer. Throw yourself into the bosom of divine mercy. Cherish the humiliation of the acknowledgement, which humiliation on one side you merit so well, and which on the other will save you from remorse and crime in this world and from eternal fire in the next.